I've made you co-host and you are ready to go, Mark.
Let me do the old share screen thing right here. PowerPoint, boom, boom, and there we go. All right. I am so impressed with that buffalo that had plaid, or buffalo with buffalo plaid. My apologies. I completely forgot about the whole mandate by Jeremy to wear buffalo plaid today. I can promise you, though, that my family's Christmas pictures this year, which we're taking in like 2 or 3 weeks, we're all wearing buffalo plaid. So got that going for me, I guess. All right. Tom, I noticed you were in the audience. You're going to see a couple of slides you saw yesterday for our Pharmacists Association meeting. So sit tight, I guess. But here today, we're going to be going over what I typically call just say no. But for once, I spell it correctly with K-N-O-W. We'll be going over, in essence, a whole bunch of different substances of abuse that many, if not all of you, possibly know as well more than anyone well about. We'll concentrate perhaps on some of the pharmacology of everything along the way. So start out with a quote from about 110 years ago. Of all the nations of the world, the United States consumes the most habit-forming drugs per capita. It's a guy that was in charge of opium 110 years ago. Have things changed? Will things change? We don't know. We got to take the global perspective. We got to take the perspective within our country. And yes, talking about the war on drugs, not necessarily COVID things these days. There's different societies everywhere, different cultures everywhere, of course. So nothing new for this crew, but this is actually technically outdated now, although preliminary data is preliminary, but we all know this information, but the way that I usually talk about overdose death rates in our country is that an American typically died every 7 minutes of a drug overdose. That's just a fancier, simple way of cranking all the numbers for the epidemiology side of life. When it used to be about 67,000, give or take a lot of heartbeats, as far as the overdose deaths. And we, I'm sure all know now with the preliminary data from 2020 during COVID, that number grew exponentially to approximately 93,000 heartbeats. Please do notice that heartbeat in the middle of the stopwatch there, or the watch for 7 minutes, making it about every 6 minutes now. That's only a change in 1 minute for my statistic here, but that's a huge change. Conversely, on the other side of life, a baby is born dependent, certainly not addicted, but dependent to opioids every 30 minutes. So we've got all sides of life within here. And I know we're all familiar with the map because we live in and work and thrive in Appalachia. So diving a little bit deeper here into the particular types of these drugs involved in the drug, or substances involved in these drug overdose deaths. Every sensationalized headline typically is always talking about opioids. And typically, as you see with the yellowish line here all the way towards the top, especially in the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's the synthetic fentanyl and analogs. Certainly not the stuff that's used over at Ruby or any other hospital in our state, country, or planet, but it would be the illicit stuff. Really not even diverted or anything, purely illicitly created and utilized. And the headlines are starting to catch up, but they're not quite there. The prescription opioid one, we'll dive a little bit deeper in another slide, but you got to remember all these other things. So here today, we'll talk about a lot of the other things, not just meth, but a lot of other hallucinogens. And even, when prescription medications become diverted or whatever as well. But it's the whole gamut, the whole pot, the whole witch's brew, since I guess it's Halloween kind of week, not really week, but kind of. Got a lot going on there. Honing in with that light bluish, almost aqua line with prescription opioids. We'll jump on that here in a moment. I don't know if everyone's knowing of this particular site. It's kind of funky, but it's StreetRX.com. There's no extreme legitimacy to the site. It's run by folks that watch the internet for what people are putting on the internet when it comes to what they paid for illegal drugs. This isn't JAML or New England Journal by any means. Tried to include a couple here of the just kind of going across the whole country, but you could type in like your zip code or your town name or wherever you are, and it'll pop up with a little kind of like a heat map with thoughts of what people have said they paid for drugs in the local area. And again, it's just what people report on social media, because people put anything on social media today, as we very well know. But that's the information that's out there. The reason that I usually share this with folks is there's certainly better resources, but as far as the general community remembering for where to find help, where to find resources and whatnot, there's links at the bottom of this website to rather reputable resources, as we have listed here, of course. So just a little funkier way of remembering things along the way. And in addition to the internet, there's certainly enough books that are out there. I could have probably 6 slides of this, but here's some of the more common or well-known ones. One of them is literally hot off the presses next Tuesday, so just over a week from now. Sam's got The Least of Us coming out. It's the follow-up to Dreamland. He was here in Morgantown, gosh, I believe it was 3 years ago, because it was a good little bit before COVID had begun. And I remember he many of you actually I know were at the conference or the meeting or whatever it was. It was when the Rockefeller Institute was opening. They had a big shebang opening, and they had him. I think Dr. Berry was talking with him as well, and whatnot. But anyways, there was a lot of chatter in the room about various addiction treatments, of course, the pharmacological side, and it was always typically the conversations were around opioid everything. And Sam was up there and was like, well, I'm doing research for my next book, and I got to tell you, there's a lot of stuff going on with meth. And I remember chatting with them afterwards, and I was like, all right, somebody else in the building is listening to the people. Just like a lot of the people in this session here today, of course, even if somebody's listening afterwards, I guess, in the recordings. But that one's coming out next Tuesday. I'm not tied to any of these books, by the way. It's purely just things read or whatever. A couple other ones that might pop off the screen. I can't see you right now because I'm presenting, but if you want to, for everyone else, raise your hand if you're watching Dopesick on Hulu. I'm just going to presume that there's a decent amount of hands going up because it's like the cool new thing or whatever. If you're not, you could actually sign up for a month for free, literally right now, and you'll be able to watch the entire 8 episodes as they come out every Wednesday. There's already 4 of them out. There'll be 4 more coming. So that, they say about half of it is true because it's based on, everything involved in the opioid crisis, especially within Purdue Pharma. But there's a lot of added stuff of just to make it a story, a Hollywood sensation. And they seem to do a pretty darn good job of it. So perhaps increasing the bandwidth of who's watching or paying attention. American Pain down on the bottom here too. That's actually a WV guy. John, when he wrote it, was not with WVU, but he is now. There's already movie rights for it, and it'd be a heck of a movie if it ever comes out as well. But that's talking about one of the major pill mills down in Florida. You're run by criminals, of course, and big bouncers at the door, and the story we all know, but quite the version of it all. The bright yellow one that might have caught your eye, the narconomics, that's talking about economists saying, where's our place at the table? Everything's all interprofessional, but how about us economists? We can tell you that if you blow up all the coca fields, you're not going to really annoy the cartels at all because that's going to cost them $3 because it's just earlier in the supply chain. It means nothing to do so. Things like that. Really, really big picture, of course. Anybody out there with an MBA, you'll like that one if you're in this realm as well, too. One of the high achiever, I mentioned this yesterday, I got my mother-in-law reading that one. She seems to just stroll on over and see all the various books we have. Again, more slides than this. That's the viewpoints of someone going through the jail system. I believe she actually ended up utilizing it, but then also dealing various drugs, and all while dating in the same household a police officer. And then her experience in jail. I know it'll keep you on the edge of the seat, that's for sure. Last one I'd mention would be the opposite side. Johan Hari having Chasing the Scream. Many of you, if not all, have probably seen the 12 to 15 minute YouTube video of his, just talking about addiction in a little bit different light. I hope it's ancient now, but for many people out there to share with others, not for you, but to share with others, that's a good one to start with, of course. Probably an ad for his book because you know how that works. But anyways. Many more of these out there. Everyone seems to, especially in general society, we all levitate towards when bad things happen to celebrities. because they're just more well known. Nothing really more than that, but the old war on drugs is affecting a lot of people, including celebrities along the way. Media, I already mentioned Dopesick. I didn't put that one on here yet, but various other ones, Drugs Inc. That's one you can watch. I believe I think it's either Tennessee or Kentucky. The episode with him where you can actually watch a guy in the middle of the woods baking up some meth in a little soda, like a Mountain Dew container or whatever. They show you the whole process. They just don't tell you one of the ingredients, even though they show it to you and whatnot, because it's on TV and they don't want to say, hey, we told everybody how to make meth. One of the ways. A relatively recent one that I've actually watched all of was Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. That guy just travels the world and takes a very lab research perspective on things, and also gets his hands a little wet with testing everything for wherever he goes. So you can check those out. If anybody's watching it, feel free to comment in the chat, I guess, if anybody's watched any of these and had any thoughts along the way. I used to ask who has seen Breaking Bad, but I've learned to ask who hasn't seen Breaking Bad. If you haven't, it's your homework. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version in a moment here. But I noticed in the intros, there was a bunch of folks, thankfully, from Health Rate. So I'm sure you're well aware of the gentleman with the ball cap in the middle of Recovery Boys there, Ryan. I may have shared this with you before, I apologize, but we had him, and you might have been there in the audience actually, but we had him here at WVU on Morgantown in the main campus Health Sciences Center for a couple hundred professional students of all our various health schools. And he made it so that you hear a pin drop in the room. And for those that don't teach in the area, that doesn't happen. I don't know, maybe I'm not captivating my students or anything, but like that doesn't happen. His stories that he shared taught more in that 20 minutes than I could ever teach in my career, quite frankly. It's just amazing what people's stories can really do for battling addiction and thriving through recovery. I'm sure otherwise in West Virginia, we know of heroin. Perhaps if anybody's got Netflix, there's Narcos, and who doesn't know Scarface, his little friend. Not everyone recalls Lord of the Rings being about addiction, about the ring, the precious ring, the drug, the precious drug. Insert whichever one you want there. This is another one where you could have, this slide could be 8 deep along the way. Songs, also, and this kind of brings up the idea of how integrated drug utilization is in our society, whether we know it or not. Now, when Eric Clapton sings about cocaine and calls the song Cocaine, I think we can catch on that he's talking about cocaine. But other stuff isn't as a full frontal in your face here. Good amount of them here for marijuana tends to be surface level. The Rolling Stones certainly liked to have multiple songs talking about diacetylmorphine, heroin. Ecstasy, the old Miley Cyrus with We Can't Stop, We Won't Stop Tripping on Molly. It's a name for ecstasy, or MDMA, methylene dioxymethamphetamine. Tongue twister, but okay, after a while. And then the one that really pops up here just purely because of the color. Sometimes in presentations, I actually play the song in here, but I'll spare you today. The Like a G6. It's like 10 years ago. It was like the song would be played at every wedding and tailgate and whatnot. But the G6 being one of those really fast airplanes for the Air Force, flying high in the sky. So somebody tripping on robo-tripping on dextromethorphan would be talking about that one. But a lot of times these songs, it's not automatically known, especially within society, for those outside of our genre of care, that it's talking about drug use along the way. Met this gentleman at a conference a decent amount of years ago. Has an amazing life story that I'd recommend anybody reading about or hearing about. But while he came up with this idea, I mean, there's a table of contents out there for anything and everything. There's freshman dorms on every campus that have various types of periodic tables, whether about actual chemicals or not. But this one, it's pretty interesting how things are organized. You go all the way to the left, and that's sedatives, all the way to the right, and that's stimulants. Each horizontal row is a different classification. It's also color-coded in that regard. Anything on here increases dopamine more than anticipated. And that's the bottom line here. It could be disguised as something that could be addictive, whether a substance up at the top or that crazy island of nucleotides there being other things that just don't fit the other ones. Social media, Facebook, chocolate, gambling, sex, you name it. That's the stuff that's down on that little island there. But it's there's actually t-shirts available of this. I've seen people wearing them. So, check that out if you want. He's got a whole bunch of stuff on substance use disorder all the time. So, but a little bit different way of thinking about things. So I mentioned, for those that don't know me, that I'm a pharmacist. Pretty important thing to start with, because when talking about the medication side, the pharmacological side, big old words just saying, hey, it's all about the mechanism and dose. But therapeutic index is something that we don't talk a lot about, but except when it's a narrow therapeutic index or NTI medication, things like thyroid medicines, warfarin, so on and so forth. The bottom line is therapeutic index is the difference between what'll kill you and what'll help you. And the wider it is, the more wiggle room you have in the dose, the better. It doesn't ultimately talk about safety, because that would be the max dose that somebody can take. This is talking about the wiggle room for dose. And as you can see here, there's a lot of illegal things that actually have a pretty darn good therapeutic index. Again, it doesn't talk about what the max dose does or what higher doses do, just that wiggle room in between. Anybody's eyes navigate down towards the bottom here and wonder why in the world nutmeg is on there? Anybody, feel free to unmute or even just type in the chat or whatever. But what is it about nutmeg, since everybody's drinking their pumpkin spice everything these days?
Prison.
I think I heard prison. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you extrapolate on that?
Oh, it's just, I just know it's one of the substances that people get in prison, and I hear it's extremely unpleasant.
We're hearing from the same sources, I guess. So there's one of the active ingredient is myristicin, and it's actually a hallucinogen. But again, it's all about the dosage. When we're having Thanksgiving dinner in a couple of weeks with family, friends, or whoever, it's not like we're going to be poisoning our family utilizing nutmeg either in the pumpkin pie or the pumpkin spice lattes or whatever. It's all about the dose there, but it is at its core, the mechanism wise, how that substance works. It's actually a hallucinogen. So that one usually catches eyes of what the heck is that doing on this chart here? I mean, the chart itself is starting to get people. So, all right, now how we really roll in our country and across the globe on different scales is our controlled substance classes, of course. C1s having no generally accepted medical use, and C2s through technically 6s, just amplifying in their abuse potential. One thing that seems to catch a lot of people is this overlap in thought that, well, does this have to do with clinically how it works, or what, any efficacy within pain management or whatever? And it has nothing to do with that. It's just whether it's generally accepted for medical use in general, and then its abuse potential. Typically, things that would get somebody on that would be, I don't have the first one on here, but tapentadol or Nucynta is a mixed action opioid for pain management. Then you have tramadol on here as a C4. Well, tapentadol is a C2, tramadol is a C4. They both have an MME factor that's less than morphine, yet they're in two completely different controlled substance classes, because that has nothing to do with how it's actually working or where it's used in clinical practice. It's just the abuse potential primarily. And that can get rather subjective, even though it's one of the highest laws of the land since 1970, on our just past our 50th anniversary. It could be when things come out as well. I mean, the go-to for everybody is alcohol. It was legal, then it was illegal, and now it's legal again. I think the only limits we have on that are in our state, you could order through the mail a maximum of 2 cases of wine. That's our limit. May have reached that recently because of a sale from the Finger Lakes. But anyways, there's ways around everything, or getting things before 1 p.m. Eastern in our state on a Sunday. Go figure. Anyways, really important to remember things like meth. Meth is a legal medication. It's a C2. More to come on that here when utilized in the appropriate means, of course. But again, on the subjectivity or the fact that it's really concentrating on abuse potential, we're all hearing or have heard a lot about carfentanil. It's a legal medicine for utilization in the veterinary sense. Its MME factor is just a preposterous 10,000, and it's 10,000 times as strong as morphine, yet it's a legal medicine, and heroin is illegal, and it's give or take, I know it's debatable, MME of 3, even if it was 10. It has no comparison compared to these two characters on the screen here with carfentanil and fentanyl, especially carfentanil. But again, it's emphasizing, it's not picking on the classifications. That's not what I'm going for here. It's just really highlighting that it's not in the clinical side of things, the pharmacological side of things. It's abuse potential, other side of the coin. And in the end, as I always say, it's all about the dosage, baby. That's paraphrasing Paracelsus, the grandfather of toxicology, who always said, all things are poison and nothing is without poison. Only the dose makes a thing not a poison. We could all die from too many potatoes, not from a potato gun, but from actually ingesting them. Same thing with apples since it's the fall. It's all about the dose with everything. Too much water can be deadly. Chocolate, gosh forbid, can be deadly, not just for dogs, for us as well too. It would take preposterous doses, but it is all about the dosage. And when dosages get a little funky, one thing we always, as anyone involved in healthcare want to know, and it should be like our first sense after the main ones, sixth sense per se, is the number for the Poison Center, 1-800-ALL-2s with a 1 in the middle. A different way that some professions have to memorize it. I know in pharmacy, it's on like every board, you have to know it. But a different way of remembering it is 1-800-ALL-2s with a 1 in the middle, because everybody remembers the phone numbers are 7 digits. So, and they also have a website and an app. Now, getting to today's title, I'm sure you're all not going to bore you with, going back to a time trip to the 80s with Just Say No. We'll just see Nancy telling us here in this regard. But, life, we fluently know that words matter, but perhaps spelling and grammar matter as well, too. I was actually in a 7th grade spelling bee, and in a later round, I got booted from said spelling bee because I was asked to spell relief. And you especially those that know me, you know what I spelled, ROLAIDS. God bless my teachers, even in 7th grade. I got booted from the thing, and that, as a side note, that's not when I knew I was going to be a pharmacist. It was actually a couple years later. But here we are today, and I do recall that moment, and because spelling matters. Just say no, KNOW. Perhaps that's what we could utilize into the future to really make a difference beyond what all of you are doing every minute of every day in taking care of patients. So if we want to just say KNOW, we're going to go through a rapid rundown of a couple different substances of abuse or misuse or whatever wording we're going to go with, generally grouped into stimulants, hallucinogens, and sedatives. As you see here, we're going to just start out with nicotine, kind of running through all of these guys here. But those of you that don't have the CTTS designation, I strongly, like every U.S. Surgeon General who has ever had a pulse, would recommend always talking to patients about smoking cessation, obviously. But going through the 3-ish day training, it's available. There's scholarships available through WVU for the folks associated, but it'll be in May coming up. I don't know if they'll do virtual or live or whatever the world. We don't know what we're doing these coming months, but this past year it was virtual. I know that much, but that program is certainly something for any healthcare professional to take a look into. You could literally just Google WVU, CTTS, and stuff will come up for you. But nicotine, that's obviously the name of the game. What does it stimulate the release of? Yes, all the above. One of those gimme questions for any student, right? But the big thing that stands out is acetylcholine, and that's that arousal. That's what, when somebody takes a smoke break, that's what's helping there, of course. And there's different contents of nicotine in different products. Juuling, vaping in general, kind of a hot topic these days. The big picture there is that it is more in the vaping sense. It's more isolated to having nicotine, so much so that there's enough nicotine in there oftentimes for a herd of elephants. So yes, less ingredients that we know of, but so much of the ingredients that we also know that it is extremely concerning. So big picture there. Not going to go off on those tangents there, but the U.S. Surgeon General reports usually always, or at least they go on record of always saying, if you can do one thing as a health professional to help somebody, smoking cessation is always number one. It's just that's how it is. So hopefully these things could help in the big picture here, or stimulate folks to get even more education in a much broader sense in that regard. So since we talked about nicotine, might as well jump up to methamphetamine, the over-the-counter version. What? Or the C2 version? What? Now, more and more folks are certainly down with understanding that disoxin. That's funny. The presentation I gave yesterday had to blur out the name on the bottle because it wasn't on the left side of the screen to begin with anyway. But anyways, methamphetamine, brand name disoxin. It's FDA approved for ADHD and obesity. It's a C2. I think it would be silly to say that, oh, that's available in every pharmacy. No. Typically, if I give a presentation, let's say there's 500 people in the audience, there'll be one person that has had it or has it in their pharmacy. If it's 1,000 people, it's still just one person. There's always that one, could be guy or girl, but that one guy, because it is out there and it is available. The one that's talked about a little bit less, but more intense is the over-the-counter product that has a very interesting abuse deterrent strategy. The ingredient, it's almost impossible for you to read it here, but it's basically just says levomethamphetamine, but it spells it differently. And it's not that it spells it wrong. It spells it by its international chemical name, which we typically never use for medications, but they used it this time because the powers that be knew that if they put levomethamphetamine on there, you might as well just lock the darn thing up because it's going to be stolen within minutes, or even purchased in large quantities within minutes. Kind of like I was familiar with Oxytrol, bladder medicine. I remember working in a pharmacy, actually multiple pharmacies, where it was stolen off the shelves just because it had the letters oxy in it. And it's, there's a part where you can chuckle and be like, my goodness, they stole Oxytrol, stole bladder medicine. But there's also a part that's kind of sad as well, too. Two sides to every coin. When it comes to this Vicks Vapo inhaler that my mom always had me using as a kid when I was sick and in need, the dose that you would need for the euphoria, the abuse side would be really through the roof. That being said, observationally, I have heard of those in the trucking industry utilizing this stuff just to keep the long nights a little bit easier. So things to know, of course. But yes, it's with all the hoopla with meth, and now available. We'll go a little bit deeper here, but got to remember first off that it is actually legal medicine. And if I were to have, this is from Breaking Bad, just in case there was more than one person that raised their hand for not watching that. But if I were to have a phone conversation with Walter White from Breaking Bad, I imagine it going like this. Mark, you mean to tell me that pure meth is already readily available as a legal prescription medicine? You got to be kidding me. 6 seasons of that show. Any pharmacist with a pulse, and quite frankly, any healthcare professional with a pulse, would have done that entire show in one episode, and it'd be boring as ever because it'll only be one episode. I mean, Hollywood's got to make some bank. It's got to take 6 seasons. So that's the revamp of that previous slide. But what's the storyline here with meth along the way? So it's kind of 3 parts. We talk about 3 waves of the opioid crisis, but there's 3 parts to this. Back in the day, meth was illicitly made with a phenylacetone, a P2P. So let's just go with P2P. P2P was the precursor to making meth. And then international resources and whatnot cracked down on that, pun intended, and made it so that wasn't happening anymore, per se. And then came along the street chemist that said, oh yeah, nice move. We'll buy all your Sudafed off your shelves. I'll send our Smurfs out there. That was the name for them conversationally, to buy up all your Sudafed. And they bought all of pseudoephedrine from a lot of shelves, from grocery stores, dollar stores, pharmacies, and wherever else. And then the map in the middle, that's our way of cracking down on that to make that not happen anymore. And that's why a lot of our law exams, depending on the profession, will have the limit of 3.6 grams and so on and so forth. But did it work? Well, it depends on what your goal was. It worked to stunt and almost stop people utilizing pseudoephedrine, at least at a higher level, to make meth. But then the street chemist said, oh, very nice. Yeah, good try again. Strike 2. And you know what, we're going to hit a couple more foul balls for like 15 more pitches and never strike out. So now they make the precursor to P2P, typically over in China, Not picking on the country, but you've seen the headlines too, where now it's illegal to make the precursors to P2P that is the precursor to meth. Yeah, it's illegal, but there's still a significant tax break for anyone who exports the product when they make it. And that's never covered in the media. That concerns me. I hope it concerns you too. And that's why now when you buy 5 bags of heroin, you get the 6th bag for free and a free bag or 2 of meth, because it's like pennies, if that, to produce. So how are we going to deal with that to not prevent a 4th version of it all? I don't know. Maybe you do. So that's enough on meth. There's way more interesting information for that. I know past presentations have actually covered a little bit about that, but this is how I would generally classify based on structures and mechanisms, how I would classify hallucinogens. So to my knowledge, you're not going to see this other places, but this was me trying to wrap my head around to be able to teach people the multitude. It's like talking about over-the-counter pain medicines, even like, oh my gosh, there's so many options. Well, you got to, group them together to have a rhyme or reason to learn everything and try things. But your belladonna alkaloids, a lot of quote unquote natural things. That mandrake root, that's one of the characters in Harry Potter movies. Then you have your anesthetics, things like Special K, PCP, Mexi. The Mexi and some of these other ones been coming around usually around 2011 or 2010-ish, when the street chemists had their revival of saying, well, if we had a methyl group, then it's not on the illegal list. So it's not illegal, but it certainly is not stated to be legal. But anyways, then we have tryptamines, things that are serotonin-like. So give them that good feeling with propelling dopamine. And then you have your phenethylamines. That's where we have things like you talked about earlier, the Molly, the ecstasy. That's the substituted amines. They're dopamine-like. And then the piperazines, which are their own little structural giants of an island. But those 5 groupings are a way to wrap our heads around the multitude of what's available on this planet as far as hallucinogens. Not going to go really deep into this, but again, this is completely from my drawing pad, and I can't really do stick figures, so I do much better in PowerPoint. Mechanisms, completely opposite, but worth discussing, in my opinion. So first generation antipsychotic medications, they're antagonists to dopamine. Second generation atypical antipsychotics are not only an antagonist to dopamine, but they're also an antagonist to serotonin, typically selectively to serotonin 5-HT2. But just go with a general idea here. So they're antagonists to that. These hallucinogens that we were talking about are agonists. So they bind with effect to those very same receptors. Hence the different colored, still little square there. So they work via the same exact pathway as perfectly legal second generation atypical antipsychotics, just in the exact opposite manner. Agonism compared to antagonism. Just worth food for thought for remembering how these things work in general, anyway. And in the end, one thing, another way, possibly if you're not visual, perhaps you're thinking about things that might annoy various clinicians here and there. Bringing up serotonin syndrome with drug-drug interactions. Oh my goodness. I get this all the time from various people, especially in the pain management side, of saying, and Tom, I know you're out there as a pharmacist, what's with your people? And always bringing up this serotonin syndrome when I prescribe something like tramadol to somebody on fluoxetine. Give me a break already. These aren't my words. I'm just telling you what I hear. And there's rhyme or reason to what people are thinking there, but serotonin syndrome, it's one of those things that hopefully you only see maybe once or twice in your career. Depending on your setting, it might be more, but typically is much less. But we have to talk to patients about it all the time. People are end up feeling like they have the flu when they don't have the flu. One way of summarizing the multitude of all these things. I usually tell patients, if it's Friday and you feel like you have the flu or you're just kind of down and out and having these kinds of symptoms, don't wait till Monday. Contact somebody on Saturday. That way, just in case, it makes it a little bit more real. But when somebody's utilizing these hallucinogens, they're technically, in a way, looking to have serotonin syndrome, which is a different little bit of a funky way. Remember in that previous slide with the serotonin factors there? If you think about what happens to them, it's like they're trying to induce serotonin syndrome with certainly not knowing that. It's a little bit of a stretch, but getting our minds thinking. All right. So as promised, that's it for hallucinogens. We can talk about those for about 8 hours, but I'll spare you. everyone is probably fluent with the various waves of the opioid crisis. Starting out with the illicit, back before this even started here, when you're talking back in the 70s, 80s, and even 100 years ago, with things that were readily available as opioids. But back in the turn of the century, that was when prescription opioid misuse, non-medical use abuse was gaining. So that purple line is actually increasing. The calculus would say that it's incremental changes through the roof there. And then that plateaued. And that's when heroin took the drastic increase in wave 2. And then now in wave 3, we have the astronomical increase in fentanyl and its analogs, as far as what gets laced into various products, all different types of products. What will be wave 4? I'm not psychic, but what's left other than all these other substances, of course, too, because it's always polypharmacy or polystreet, as I would say. So things that really sometimes boil our blood, I think. This is the article that led to the many headlines. That the headlines typically go to some tune of 75% of heroin utilizers started with prescription opioids. Boom, done, that's it. Not much more in the article other than that. And that's where the sensationalization comes in like no other. Is it false? Is it wrong? Is it hearsay? Is it fake something? Is it? It's not. It's legit. It's just not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. What it doesn't talk about is where they got them. And this is why it's the kidney punch to all of us clinicians and healthcare professionals in general, because it's not always coming directly from us, hardly ever, actually. It's typically from family, friends, drug dealers, cash, free, whatever. But everything in blue about 2/3 of the time from this, I do have the reference on here. This has a primary reference, but it was included in a DEA report. I feel like it gives a little bit more oomph with the DEA saying, hey, it's actually not coming from healthcare, 1/3 of the time only. So, food for thought there. But these are the things that don't get covered in the sensationalized yet real involving human loss headlines that are out there. All right. Let's see. We got a quote here from George Carlin. Mother's milk leads to heroin. No need to acknowledge. Just a throwaway thought. We'll acknowledge anyway. But anyways, that's and then one of the follow-up things is, well, why? Or there's another report from a DEA report saying that people levitate towards these products, not for the euphoria, but to actually take care of real ailments like, pain and tension and anxiety and all of that, as you see here, where in this particular study highlighted by the DEA, it's a little bit more than 10% of the time people looking for that euphoria, whereas it's really taking care of other things. That's where we come in typically, especially in pain management and psych. This is things that we're typically in charge of to help our patients. So, all right, now here's one other. You're gonna have to go with me. I do like math, I swear, but we often hear about how we, as West Virginia, wild and wonderful, are the ground zero of the opioid crisis, epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it. And those numbers don't lie. But what I try and propel people to do is to think both numbers and percentages. So here is a worldly and international perspective where we still, as our country, we lead the world. Yes. So when you're looking at the actual overdoses, it's by far and large. But we're also a large country. So perhaps it's worth taking a look at the percentage of the population. And I had to go off of this study, which is obviously a little bit dated based on the numbers, but they seem consistent throughout time. I've followed up with them. The bottom line here is when I have created that final column there to look at the overdoses compared to the population, and all of a sudden Estonia is getting somewhat in the ballpark with us there, as I highlighted here in the red circles. So, and again, Estonia's got a completely different population, certainly a different culture, but it's not apples and oranges here. We got to look at both the numbers and the percentages. So much so that when we look at us as ground zero, it's always based on the overdose rate. So on the last slide, I was saying on the globe, we got to look at percentage because we're only looking at numbers. Here in our country, we got to start looking at numbers because we're only looking at percentages. By leaps and bounds, our state leads our country when it comes to drug overdose deaths. But we have a small population as well, too. And the reason it's important to look at numbers and percentages is because we're involving illegal drugs and, quite frankly, predominantly illegal drugs. A drug dealer gets off a bus in Huntington, West Virginia, and deals heroin that happens to be laced with carfentanil, fentanyl, and whatever else. And there's, 27 overdoses in 4 hours. To my knowledge, no one died, but there was 27 overdoses. That's a lot of overdoses. That's tough to deal with and involves a lot of humans. But what if he got off the bus in Ohio? I mean, we're not talking about going to a doctor's office here or a pharmacy. What if he got off the bus in Ohio? Well, it wouldn't affect their percentage, their rate as much because their population is through the roof compared to us. Yet, when you look at the overdose numbers, we're relatively pale in comparison compared to Ohio and Pennsylvania because they have such a higher population as well, too. So it's just the point here is that it goes both ways. We got to always be looking at the numbers and the percentages, not just one or the other. Another puzzling thing here, I was once asked in a presentation and didn't know the answer, so I had to look it up. And sometimes you don't know where to look things up. As far as opioid supply, we got the left side and the right side here, but the left side is saying, where's all the illicit stuff coming from? Well, typically, as far as heroin is coming from the south of Mexico, we got a lot of stuff coming from China, sometimes the Middle East, and overall Asia in general, of course. But the reports are still saying Mexico by far for the actual heroin, not for the adulterants. But the question then becomes, well, where's all of our, like most opioids are semi-synthetic coming. The natural stuff is what's in the poppy. It's thebaine, which is utilized to create other prescription opioids, and then morphine and codeine. Everything else has to be made. Where are the poppies grown to make our prescription opioids? Which, by the way, would be by far and large the largest producers of the poppy, like way more than El Chapo and his crew down in the cartels. But Spain, Australia, and France, as you see here, they lead the world in growing poppies to supply the prescription demand. I found that to be a very interesting question once, so I decided to share it at all times. All right, so how do you make heroin? We can't leave today without something funky, right? So you go out there with your Freddy Krueger. Don't just use a little knife because that would take way too long, but use the Freddy Krueger hand and you get all the ooze out of the poppy, and you're gonna purify that down to get rid of all the flowers and the sticks and the leaves and all that stuff. And you'll be left with the raw opium. Then you're gonna extract the morphine out of that. And then you're going to add 2 acetyl groups, as highlighted here. It's just morphine with 2 acetyl groups, diacetyl morphine. And then you add some HCl in there in a fancy process and you end up with the salt. And then you ship it to America and it's utilized and shipped across the globe as well, too. That's how you make heroin. You're welcome. So earlier, talked about that chart with all the various different overdose deaths. But before, since we talked about the illicit side, here's prescription overdose deaths. They haven't gone away. Our prescribing of opioids in our state and in our country has decreased a lot over the last 4, 5, 6 years. But the actual prescription opioid deaths have plateaued for the last 10, 15 years or so. But the point being that they haven't decreased, they have plateaued. So they're still out there. But again, where did they get them from? The sensationalized stories do happen. But there's predominantly, it's actually just from diversion along the way. So I mentioned that song earlier of the like a G6. So anytime I do any talks that are in a larger conference hotel or something, I always waddle on down to the gift shop of any hotel, and always, just like in every grocery store, dollar store, pharmacy, and any store across our country, you can find this little 3-ounce bottle of, some might call it Robitussin, some might call it Cough DM. The bottom line is it's the stuff with the dextromethorphan in it. And if someone were to chug the bottle, again, it's only 3 ounces if it's like just like this. And this is what happens typically with a lot of younger folks, high school, maybe perhaps more so college age, where chug the whole bottle. And what do you get? Well, it's all about the dosage. Initially, what's actually on there to utilize would be for cough suppression. A little bit higher dose would help with pain, reportedly, and higher doses give you those hallucinations and whatnot, as I have highlighted here for cranking the dose. But the point is, this is readily available everywhere, except I have I don't have it. You have to be 19 and show ID here to buy that in our state. So things are different. Will that actually help, though? Is there a difference for a 19-year-old and compared to an 18-year-old? I don't know, but we got to do something, right? All right, not going to go too far into the weeds here. It's impossible to avoid puns when you're talking about cannabis, but there's a significant lacking in general society for understanding the terminology associated with cannabis. the whole genus species thing says a lot. It's cannabis. Everything's all cannabis. There's talk now about having subspecies and all that. If you see it online, especially social media, don't get lost in the weeds. It's all cannabis. And then things become either sativa or indica. Indica, we're thinking like the 1990s Dr. Dre label, Chronic. Those of you that had gone with the music, that having in its core more THC, sativa being more the industrial side of things, having perhaps a little bit bigger source of CBD. But just like there's hybrids of tomatoes, there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of hybrids. So but when we're hearing things like THC, CBD, the whole gamut, we got to remember along the way that there's a lot of differences in the terminology. Things in general, kind of wrapping up here towards the end. As far as general concerns on the negative side, marijuana lung reportedly worse than tobacco, and tobacco is still rampant in our country, of course. There's the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where people want to take 12 hot showers a day. There was just Nobel Prize awarded to those learning about or finding out more about the TRPV1 receptor within the body, which affects capsaicin and is involved in this hyperemesis syndrome. And then on the right here, you're seeing whenever the perceived risk is low, utilization increases. When the perceived risk is high, utilization goes down. Interesting points. And of course, the marijuana or THC breathalyzers are still in the works. They've been for years now, actually. Things we need to know. I always say to our pharmacy folks, especially, we're all down with usual hepatic, liver, CYP450 interactions. This is where various cannabinoids, your two heavy hitters, CBD and THC, come into play. And anytime you see something involving 3A4, 2C19, and even 2D6, that's a lot of medicines, folks. So when somebody is utilizing any type of a cannabinoid, we need to know that so that we can do drug interaction checks always. That's that. 3 or 4 more slides, though. Just perspective, of course, on this whole overall war on drugs, that just say no, K-N-O-W idea. This drug-related overdose deaths, it was 70,000. Now it's 93. And I don't think I'd be out of my mind to say we'll hit 6 figures easily for 2021. And we've already seen the preliminary first month's data that it most likely will. But alcohol, perfectly legal. 100,000 related deaths a year. Tobacco, legal, which costs a lot. 500,000 related deaths every year. Kind of makes one ponder. So much so that Nora Volkow had mentioned from NIDA, I think, the effects of a drug, legal or illegal, on health are not only determined by its pharmacological properties, but also its availability and acceptability. In this respect, legal drugs, alcohol and tobacco, offer a sobering perspective, calling for the greatest burden of disease associated with drugs, not because they are more dangerous than illegal drugs, but because their legal status allows for more widespread exposure. The next 12 to 24 months in our country are going to be one heck of a ride as far as where we go with vaping things, cannabis everythings, and all of that. But perhaps those are things to keep in mind, at least from the top, because we're all involved. I recently just made this little boat. The boat has many triangles. Typically, this is a blame game, but really it's all about who's involved in keeping the boat afloat. When we're helping our patients, we're trying to keep their boat afloat. There's enough court cases to fill a courtroom the size of the world. There's enough arguments on both sides of every coin along the way. But everyone on here is who's involved in and has responsibility for patient care. And it stems all the way to the top, as wide as you can go, right down to the patient. That's the part of the boat that nobody ever includes for whatever reason, except when we're having a patient in front of us and trying to help them. But the patient's involved as well, too. And everyone is involved to keep the boat afloat. So when people need help, pretty sure everyone here already knows where to send them, but turns out there's help for healthcare professionals as well. I'd highlight Brad Hall is the leader of our state medical professionals health program. The website's there for you. I'm pretty sure he would even take a text or a phone call from anyone in need at any point. So keep that in mind out there. If you want some more information on this to wrap up truly, here's some riveting international, sometimes national, but usually international reports. And the top right, I also included 2 blogs. Again, not New England Journal, not JAMA, but blogs to learn from street chemists that are willing to share. And they share a lot of stuff. It's like Amazon reviews. Half of it is junk, but the other stuff we can learn. Often street chemists know way more than PhDs or whatever other doctorate that's out there. So hopefully these can help folks go even further. And it's the technique kind of sorted week of Halloween. So I thought, I saw this online. And it really made me stop my little hand going through social media. And I was like, inferring causation from correlation. It's on a pumpkin with a light. That means that's scary. A lot of the things that we go over, everyone jumps into the idea of, oh, well, that's the cause. That's the reason for it, when it's just correlation on many accords. So welcome any thoughts or whatever here today. Hopefully that was enjoyable, kept you awake. That's on the stimulant side, but happy to take any questions, or even if you guys want to email me or LinkedIn or whatever the heck you prefer. Probably should connect on there regardless, but feel free to send me a message there too. But
Thank you so much, Mark. That was great. Very informative. Don't judge me. I haven't seen Breaking Bad, but I did go see the Rolling Stones in concert recently. In my younger age,
for you. I'm not judging. I just said you have homework.
I have
You have
so
homework.
much
It's a lot of homework, by the way.
Yeah, on top of my other homework. But if you guys like music, I love music and dancing. So you think you can dance? They did a performance piece by Sarah Bareilles on gravity, and you can kind of interpret it the way you want to, but a lot of people do associate that to like a toxic relationship, whether that's to drugs or relationship. It's a really beautiful, very moving piece if you guys ever want to watch that. But does anybody else have any questions before you go into announcements?
Going easy on me.
Dr. Morrison, I think I saw you unmute there. Did you have a comment?
No. You did so good. They don't have questions, Mark.
The entire thing was a mic drop.
Derek, you're waving. Does that mean you did good or bye or? Buffalo Derek.
I don't really know. I'm sorry.
That's amazing. No, you're fine. The only announcement that I have then is the next session is going to occur on November 8th with Philip West, and he's going to be discussing confidentiality in groups. So we thank you so much, Mark, for your time and your didactic today, and everybody that joined us. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.